Hi everyone, it's Tom Moore. I'm doing my weekly GED reflections. Two big items for this week is one, I passed the GED ready for social studies, which I think is a pretty big achievement. And the second thing is I got to speak to a GED advisor. So let's talk quickly about what I learned about the social studies exam. Um, I didn't do much study for social studies. I would say most of my study was Netflix, Disney, and Paramount over, a decade or two of that, which says a lot about the marketing engine of the United States, but it's really helpful. What social studies is the study of people within society. So it covers history, geography, and I found the test really, really, really unusual. Some questions were like, oh, that makes sense. That's a really specific question about a particular contextual piece of history or politics. But other questions, which I found absolutely fascinating, were about identifying author bias. Now, to me, I've never done a test um, that I can remember that looks at that issue. And I actually found the five questions that I did out of maybe, I think the practice test is around 25 or 30 questions, but there were about five questions where um, I really had to look again. One question was, here are the points, but when you look at the footnotes, can you spot which point shows the bias of the author? And a lot of the bias were a bias around social issues or political issues. So in some cases, they were pretty veiled to see. Now, I found this really unusual because I haven't really done a test that's had that type of questions, those type of questions in it. But also, um, it's a really good skill to have um, in society right now, which is, can you identify bias, and can you identify what the truth is, and as a part of identifying those processes, can you remain an independent thinker? So I actually found that those questions were extremely good at making me revisit my own question of, am I good at identifying author bias? So although I wasn't surprised at most of the questions in the GED Ready for Social Studies, I was actually put to the test of in a way that I didn't think I was. So the hidden value of the social studies test is that it actually helps you pragmatically look at how you identify author bias, which I think is an extremely, extremely valuable skill when we look at the rise of bias, but also the rise of using AI. Being able to pinpoint author bias and the context it comes from will become extremely useful if it isn't already. The other thing too, I was sort of blown away that I did the practice test to see where I was at. I hadn't really done any study for social studies, and I didn't go too bad on the test, getting way better than a pass. So I think that shows that if you are interested in something, I'm very interested in history, it becomes easier to do. And it was also a test that leans into more the study of people and independent thinking versus just purely objective questions with objective answers. So I like that type of test. So for me, I was surprised that I passed, but not that surprised if I take a step back and see what I'm interested in. So that's the GED Ready Social Studies test. The next one for me is the science test. The science test I'm not looking forward to learning a maths test. I'm just not that interested. I'm interested in physics and how it works and biology, but I never, I actually am interested in science, but I never really did it at school, at the senior level. So I'm going to be interested to see what the questions are and how I go there. I don't think I'll go anywhere near as good as social studies, and I think this will require quite a bit of revision. So I take on the GED Science Ready exam this weekend, which is exciting. So results to come. The second part I want to quickly talk to you about a GED advisor. So this week I'll do a deeper video on it next week. I did a presentation last week to the GED team on what we're finding out about GED learners and what is really, really different about them compared to an average college grad. And what's really interesting about the GED learning process is that a lot of people say the GED teaches you how to learn. I don't meet many people that say college taught me how to learn. Maybe that's what it used to do, but I don't think it does it anymore. So there is like a 10% decrease in the amount of college graduates this year than there were, I think, about 5 to 6 years ago. And what's really interesting with this GED advisor, their job is to, if you're on a particular program at the GED, they coach you and advise you through the study process. And I'd sort of asked him for 2 questions. One, how do you know if someone's going to be successful? And it's because there's always stories of hardship, and the grittier that they've been through, the higher the chances of success, especially if it's the second time they've signed up, which is interesting. The second question I asked is, what's the main piece of advice that you might find the most helpful? And this idea of showing someone how to learn something is extremely valuable. So, what was really interesting is that he was like, they learn to be independent thinkers. I'm like, how do they learn to be independent thinkers? He goes, well, it starts with, do you know what this means? And the first thing the GED advisors show them is how to Google it or write a query. So teaching people how to query is one way you teach independent thinking. Because the second way is independent thinking is the GED process is individual. There's no group assignments. So if you don't have the discipline to start to drive yourself through the program, you struggle to finish. So being a solo learner on your own learning track also drives independent thinking. And then, it then becomes about looking at, how do you approach multiple choice questions? How do you approach long form, short form questions? And what's your strategy to answer the question? So like querying, being in a solitary sort of confinement to do your own learning, and the idea of passing the test is extremely, extremely interesting. Like, because they have to game for the test, they refine their ability to answer questions. So if you can write a query, you learn by yourself because you have to. So you lean more into your learning preference. And you learn how to answer questions. You become an independent thinker, which is really, really interesting. Because in a lot of cases at college, you have a group, you have a tutor, but you can also just fit into the classroom. It's not independent. You have group tasks and group assignments. And that could hold back someone's ability to independently think. Whereas every GED learner has to go through by themselves and overcome a barrier. They can go to a classroom, but there's not really a discussion of topics. It's more about a discussion of how to pass the exam and how to individualize and take ownership of your learning. So the big items I took away from this week at the GED is the social studies exam was interesting and unusual because it helped you identify author bias, which I think is a really relative skill. Two, there are GED advisors who can coach you through services that are generally driven by the idea of impact and helping someone through hardship. And three, I was reinforced that the individual transformation process and evolution process is learning to become an independent thinker and an independent learner. I fundamentally think whether or not the content you take in on the GED is valuable, that as a trait, the idea of independent thinking, independent learning, is extremely valuable and makes these people extremely employable right now in the current market with their current credential and nothing more, if you're willing to train them. Thanks for your time this week, and next week I'll tell you how I go with science.